welcome to Planetary Dysphoria Blues, which I'm very proud of myself for coming up with now. And thought it'd be really a good idea just to actually do something about the trans community and climate and community sustainability, because I was seeing a lot of posts about how it was affecting a lot of different communities, and then just nobody was really talking about the trans community, which is no change there, really, is it? Let's face it.
Climate crosses all kind of borders, class, gender, race, but obviously people, as with wider society, don't really tend to talk about the kind of impact that it's going to have on the queer community, like the climate crisis. So everybody's lives are going to be impacted. Some of us already are, less so in the UK because we're kind of quite a privileged country. But what the kind of thing we want to talk about today is it's going to be kind of doomy and gloomy, and then we're going to have some food and make everyone feel better, and then we're going to talk about what we can actually do. But to start with, I kind of want to kind of put things in a bit of perspective. I've obviously been kind of involved in the climate community for a while, doing activism stuff, so it's kind of everyday sort of we're all gonna die kind of depressing stuff for me, but some people are kind of new to it, so to kind of ease you into it, a few of the things that are going on. So we've got a climate crisis, the government isn't acting on it, there's various groups trying to put pressure on it, on different governments to try and make some changes so that we don't all die and drown and all these horrible things. Obviously it's kind of hard to kind of act on something with such urgency, and kind of the rate that climate activism has kind of picked up recently, it's kind of, I don't know, it definitely feels like the cishets have kind of taken over and kind of gone we need to address this issue urgently, we don't have time for anything else. So now we're kind of backtracking and thinking, right, we need to kind of start including people in this. So research shows that those who contribute least to the climate crisis are the ones who are going to be most affected. So it's going to be working class people, it's going to be poor people, the billionaires aren't going to really see the kind of impacts of it until later. So it's going to affect people who are poor in the global south first, and it's going to affect rich people in the global south and poor people in the north, and then eventually it will affect rich people in the north. People who are queer, obviously they're more vulnerable just in general, because you have a higher chance of being homeless. 40% of youth in America who are homeless identify as being queer in some form. During Hurricane Katrina, I know that was a long time ago, but it was a kind of thing to do with the climate crisis. A lot of queer people turned away from emergency shelters and stuff. There's cases in kind of small island communities, and especially in Jamaica, where queer people they have to live outside of the towns and stuff. And obviously if you're living in coastal areas and you're living outside of the actual towns in the coastal areas, even your housing is kind of more vulnerable to effects of the climate crisis. Obviously people who are living in these areas, they're not kind of us in the UK. I'm looking around the room and it's kind of mostly white people here, so it's definitely affecting marginalised kind of people more so, especially indigenous groups, black people in America. We want to kind of talk about how we can kind of be more self-sustaining and kind of not have to end up being in this mess where people can't get hormones into the country, which is already happening. People can't get the care they need, so we kind of want to start talking about sustainability in the long term.
New stuff has happened here since this place has been opened as well, to make sure the trans community has been somewhat sustainable. This place has always been very, very, very staunchly trans inclusive and has been run by trans people throughout its history. It's been going 8 years now. I was here before this bar, and I'll probably be here long after it, but
that is a long time in trans history as well, though.
It is a long time in trans history.
Yeah, a lot of us are involved in the activist community, and within climate activism and within trans activism, I think if we can be factoring in the environment when we're doing these actions, and actually deeply considering, we want to do this absolutely amazing smoke bomb demonstration in front of a conference that we know is transphobic. How's the climate going to factor into that? Can we be mindful of what we're doing without doing a climate demonstration, but in terms of awareness of the climate? And I also wanted to acknowledge that, this is such a majority workspace, and just so you all know, there are queer trans people of colour, we do exist as well, and it's a lot harder for us to sometimes make it to all of the spaces, but we're here.
But when you were saying about how the community and how it seems online, most of the community is the people who have money, and the people on Instagram who've got popular rather than it, and then most young trans people think that that's their community rather than getting involved with a local community.
That a lot of the time baby trans will want to reach out to these almost icons who aren't accessible and aren't realistic, And so ideally we would be making the space that is accessible and realistic, that they can feel like they're a part of. And yeah, a huge part of that is including trans people of colour and is including the environment in the discussion as well.
Rosie, who is a great cis lesbian ally, has got an allotment recently after I kind of went, we should get a community allotment. And she kind of went, yeah, I've now got one, here's 2 beds. So like, talking about sustainability, like that kind of thing is great. We can grow our own food.
When I lived in New Zealand, there was like an Indigenous focused transgender charity that, obviously I'm not Indigenous, but they supported me a lot, and I worked for them for a bit, called Gender Minorities Aotearoa. I definitely recommend checking them out and donating any money if you can to them. Obviously, most trans people don't have money to throw at things, but just let you know. But they ran like a recycled clothes shop below where their stuff ran upstairs. So every day we would sell like huge amounts of clothes, and at the end of the day, the money that clothes that we didn't sell, we donate to women's prisons, because they have a very high proportion, like hugely disproportionate amount of Maori women in prisons. Obviously, like a lot of countries, there's massive like racial disparities in that. So it kind of not only reflected the focus of the organisation and the space that it was for, but it also was a very practically sustainable way of making the most of resources and supporting the charity financially. And sort of speaking of that, I think it is worth mentioning like those intersections don't just exist like on a political level, but in a very practical sense as well, because like as we all know, there is definitely an element of people in the global south most massively affected in very real terms by climate change in the present tense, but also those communities are very massively affected by literal gender colonialism and the eradication of Indigenous genders, and those two things definitely like do go like hand in hand. So I mean, I'm not by any means an expert on it, and there are lots of resources by Indigenous people that I can point you towards if you're interested in finding out more, but I think that's coming from a Olivier's point, that's something to bear in mind, that it's like a practical a thing for a lot of people in the world and not just like a hypothetical political discussion as well.
Like, it's really hard to actually get a scope of the trans community, but when suddenly you all sat around in a room, you can actually go, this is my community, these are the people that are my community that are supporting me.
Like communities existing in like a physical sense, like trans people actually living near each other and using the same resources, does also reflect sort of like the element of like class in the community, class disparity, and almost that because transgender people, like we've mentioned, are so much more highly likely to be like homeless and to be in financially difficult situations as a result of sort of like surgery costs, and like if they choose like that route, obviously that's like a massive thing on the community as well. And there's a lot of it's like slightly different in the UK, but in other countries, I'm going to go back to New Zealand again because I think it's a good example of this. Like district health boards over there, also I know other countries operate similarly. Like only certain districts will support transgender health, so you'll have huge amounts, literally, of like a flight of trans people moving into one area when that area puts funding into a certain surgery. It's like quite funny how literal that is. So I think we've also got to be aware when we're talking about like sustainability, that like that's also in like a physical sense, like the housing that we live in is often precarious. The places that are cheap to buy are often areas, especially in England, that are like floodplains or high air pollution and stuff. So I think like I doubt there's any official research into this area, but there's definitely a reflection that like trans people who like physical communities in urban spaces, especially in working class and impoverished areas, do like see the worst effects of the climate change like around us.
My friend Emma Franklin once said to me that Leeds is the strongest trans community outside of Brighton that she's ever seen, and I think that is really fucking true, and part of that is because we do have a gender clinic here.
Yeah, even though I've still never seen it.
It exists, just none of us have quite gotten past the outer walls. And then, on top of that, like, we've been able to build things like Trans Leeds and Non-Binary Leeds, which has had this community spring up. And I think that friend said to me the other night, was kind of like, there's almost two kinds of trans, the trans that are living in like Hyde Park, Burley area, and then the trans that are living in Armley and Beeston. As a kind of like, just the kind of thing about, here's maybe a little thing about class, like Hyde Park and Burley is like a student area, but also it's very expensive to live in if you're not a student. And like, so I live out in Armley, it is a shithole. I'm not going to make any noise about that. It's my shithole, but it's a shithole.
Honestly, like, Armley has a lot of class issues as it is. Like, there's a lot of issues with alcoholism, which ultimately is all boiled down to class. A lot of crime, again, all boiled down to class. And it is that thing of, like, when you are a poor working class tran, you end up moving to an area that is the area you can afford to live in, whether that is an area that is safe for you or not. And Armley's definitely not safe for me.
Probably.
Yeah, I feel like we probably wouldn't have made some good messages.
Yeah.
I'm gonna grab one of the other sausages.
Okay.
I think we can try and have things before.
Sausage.
Yeah, and then
The allotment is intended as a bit of a safe space for the trans community, being very aware if and when cis people would come into that space for us to use their labour, but just just so that no one would get sort of a horrible surprise.
To pay for food and use it as like a pay-as-you-feel cafe kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like I got inspired by the junk food project.
Yeah.
It would be very cool to be able to actually have this be like a resource for not only just growing a few courgettes a year, but like actually teaching people how to maybe do their own thing in their own garden, and also doing things with the food that we make and cooking and eating and cooking healthily and sustainably and stuff.
We were outlining pooling resources for basically creating a form or a spreadsheet of some kind so that we could pool resources about who has beds, sofas, bedding and availability for a short-term stay for homeless trans youth in the Leeds area.
To meet whoever's staying in these people's houses first, in a public place, have a conversation with them, and also potentially a different spreadsheet, because now suddenly I love spreadsheets, of people who actually really require the housing, because they could come to us through a load of different sources, and there could be people who very urgently need housing today, doesn't matter where it is, and there could be people who more long term are looking
falling, who can see it.
Empty properties that aren't being used, and
squatters' rights.
I mean, there's a house on my road. I so desperately want someone to go and squat in it.
But safe environments instead of like St George's Crypt.
I spoke to someone from SAGE, which is I think the 50 or 60 plus LGBT group that Leeds do, and at the moment there is an activist group, I don't know the name of them, that are petitioning the council for LGBT housing, and I don't know what that would be weighted towards in the LGBT community and whether or not that would still be as planned as we want it to be, but know that that is in the works, and from what I've heard seems like it will be happening. It's over the next few years, and it's not an immediate solution.
We've written about like the internet, how not everyone has access to it, so it's not necessarily accessible. Things that are on the internet, like, I don't know, I find out about a lot of events, especially ones that happen here and within like the communities that I'm in, through the internet and just through Instagram, which is fine for me because I don't have trouble reading difficult to read text, whereas some people do. So like, if people are ever making posters for events, Comic Sans is a really good font to use, and everyone shits on it, and it's a good font to use because people can read it, not having like vibrant backgrounds, things like that. Making sure that like there's all like the accessibility, like information on it, like how loud the room is going to be, like lighting, things like that. We mentioned like silent protests. A lot of like actions and things that like kind of happen on the streets are very like loud, and there's a lot of conflict, and there's a lot of like confrontation and shouting, and like you might have some hecklers, whereas like doing like a silent protest, like nobody's going to be mad at you for that, like they're just going to kind of like, I don't know, it's kind of like a nice space, and it kind of makes it a bit more accessible for people.
Yeah, it's a really brilliant idea. I went to one back when I lived in Paris, and it was to do with a black man who'd been killed by the police, and it was very, very powerful because of the silence, because we were just all too tired to yell again about it. I think, just having an awareness that if it's a silent protest, it's good because it meets a lot of accessibility needs, but it is quite a specific style of protesting,
You have to
and
find
it's
the
very
messaging
sad,
there.
and the messaging behind that yeah, it would just have to be really carefully thought out and quite nuanced.
I think it's quite clever though, because you're hard to demonise if you're being completely peaceful, whereas the second someone disagrees with you, they become the dickhead because they've started on a peaceful person.
It's like actively being like non-violent is like so powerful because it kind of puts you in a position where like anybody else is the dickhead in that situation. And obviously you could have like people around just kind of, being like de-escalators and stuff and just kind of, giving out flyers or something like to kind of let people know why you're there. But yeah, it's like an actual, like going to the protest, it's just going to make it so much more kind of accessible to not have people screaming and shouting at you.
Kind of making sure if it is a protest, making people aware of the risks that may be there, like say with like Pride, making people aware that there are gonna be TERFs present.
So one thing that was really great about going around and listening to all the tables was that all of these things interlinked to each other. So there were very similar conversations going off between tables about like accessibility of information for homelessness, accessibility of information for that, but also how that applies to like safeguarding and how that can be used, blah blah blah, which was great to hear. That everybody was kind of on the same page, even though the topics were different. Hopefully everybody has really enjoyed the event and everyone's got something useful out of it.
Thank you, Luna. Thank you. Thank you.
So eager applause when I get at my performance.